Johnny Cash's Jeep sat parked on the side of a Tennessee road in early October 1967, engine still ticking as it cooled. The door hung open. Inside the vehicle, pill bottles rolled across the floorboard, empty, all of them. At 6'2", Johnny Cash weighed 155 pounds. He hadn't slept in days, hadn't eaten anything but amphetamines by the handful. His throat was so dried out from pills he could barely speak, let alone sing. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, past the thorns and brush, the mouth of Nickajack Cave waited. He was walking toward it. If you're here for the stories they don't tell in the documentaries, the ones that almost ended before they became legends, consider subscribing. This is where we go deeper. By October 1967, the music industry in Nashville had written Johnny Cash off. The man in black was through. He'd been in and out of hospitals, in and out of jail cells. He'd canceled countless shows because he was too wasted to stand on a stage. His first marriage had collapsed. His career was circling the drain. At over 6 feet tall, Cash had dropped to 155 pounds, unable to sleep or eat due to his severe amphetamine addiction. The pills had started as a solution, something to keep him going on the road, energy to perform night after night, then barbiturates to bring him down, then more speed to wake back up. By 1967, it wasn't a cycle anymore. It was a free fall. Cash later recalled, "I was canceling shows and recording dates, and when I did manage to show up, I couldn't sing because my throat was too dried out from the pills." He'd tried. God knows he'd tried to stop. Friends had intervened. June Carter had thrown his pills away more times than anyone could count. But the pills always came back. And now, standing at the edge of Nickajack Cave, Johnny Cash had decided there was only one way out. Cash felt abandoned, lonely, and completely hopeless, leading him to decide to end his life in early October 1967. He knew this cave. He'd explored it years earlier with friends, back when life was simpler, back before the pills, back before everything fell apart. Nickajack Cave was massive, some chambers larger than football stadiums. The passages ran for miles under the mountains, all the way to Alabama, and people got lost in there regularly. Cash knew people who entered without direction often never came back out, and that was exactly what he wanted. He didn't leave a note, didn't call anyone. He just took a flashlight, stuffed his pockets with whatever pills he had left, and started walking into the darkness. The cave entrance was 140 feet wide and 50 feet high, a yawning mouth in the Tennessee hillside. Once you stepped inside, the temperature dropped, the light disappeared, the world outside ceased to exist. Johnny walked deeper, and deeper, and deeper still. Cash walked into the blackness of Nickajack Cave until he could walk no more, intending to join those who had died there. He crawled when he couldn't walk. The flashlight beam bounced off limestone walls, illuminating nothing that mattered. Just rock, just darkness, just the path forward. Hours passed. His knees scraped against stone, his hands bled. The flashlight started to dim. And then it died. Complete darkness. The kind of darkness that has weight to it, that presses against your eyes even when they're open. The kind where you can't tell if you're facing up or down, forward or back. Cash later wrote that the absolute lack of light was appropriate, for at that moment I was as far from God as I had ever been. He lay down on the cold cave floor. This was it. This was where Johnny Cash's story would end. Not on a stage, not in a recording studio, not even in a hospital bed surrounded by people who loved him. Here, alone, in the dark. He'd wasted his life, destroyed his marriage, hurt everyone who ever cared about him. The pills had won, and now he would just disappear.
If you've ever been in a place so dark you couldn't see a way forward, and somehow found one anyway, leave a comment. Sometimes the most impossible moments are the ones that change everything. Johnny Cash lay in that darkness for a long time, waiting for the end. But something was happening, something he couldn't explain. He began to feel something powerful, a sensation of utter peace, clarity, and sobriety that he couldn't understand. How could he feel clear? He'd been awake for days. He'd taken pills by the handful. His body should have been shutting down. But instead, his mind focused on God. Cash became conscious of a very clear, simple idea. I was not in charge of my destiny. I was not in charge of my own death. I was going to die at God's time, not mine. He hadn't prayed before crawling into this cave, hadn't asked for help, hadn't reached out to anyone. But lying there in the darkness, he realized something. He'd left God, but God hadn't left him. The man in black raised his head. He didn't know how to get out, didn't know which direction was forward, didn't even know if he could stand, but he started moving.
If stories about the moment everything changes, when giving up becomes getting up, matter to you, consider subscribing. We tell the stories that don't make it into the highlight reels. Cash started crawling in whatever direction presented itself, feeling ahead with his hands to guard against falling, moving slowly and calmly. In total darkness, there was no up or down, no sense of direction, just movement. Hands reaching forward, testing each surface before putting weight on it. His fingers traced along stone walls, his knees dragged across rough ground. He had no idea if he was going deeper into the cave or toward the exit. Then he felt it. A breeze. Faint, barely perceptible, but there. Cash felt a gentle, soft breeze and knew that following its direction would lead to a way out. He followed it, slowly, methodically, crawling toward that whisper of moving air. The breeze grew stronger, then light. Not much at first, just a shade, a hint. But after hours in absolute darkness, even the faintest glow was a beacon. He crawled faster. The light grew, and finally, the mouth of the cave appeared ahead. If this moment resonates with you, the moment when the impossible becomes possible, tap the like button, not for the algorithm, for the reminder that some people make it out. When Cash emerged from the cave, June Carter and his mother were waiting at the entrance, clutching a basket of food. They shouldn't have been there. They didn't know where he'd gone. He hadn't told anyone. But they knew something was wrong. They felt compelled to come, and so they waited. June Carter, who'd been trying to save him for years. His mother, who'd never given up on her son. They stood there at the mouth of Nickajack Cave as Johnny Cash crawled back into the light. Cash told them on the drive back to Nashville, "God saved me from killing myself." He promised to commit himself to God and do whatever it took to get off drugs. It wasn't easy. It wasn't instant. Recovery never is. But on November 11th, 1967, just over a month after crawling out of that cave, Johnny Cash stood on stage again. It was a high school fundraiser, and he was terrified before going on, but surprised to discover that the stage without drugs was not the frightening place he'd imagined it to be. He was clean, he was sober, he was performing straight for the first time in over a decade. And he didn't collapse, he didn't fail, he didn't need the pills to be Johnny Cash. He just needed to be himself. The story doesn't end there, because recovery is never a straight line. Cash stayed clean for 7 years, long enough to marry June Carter on March 1, 1968. Long enough to record the legendary Live at Folsom Prison album that revitalized his career. Long enough to have a son, John Carter Cash, born in March 1970. But addiction doesn't just disappear because you want it to.
He relapsed in 1977, again in the early 1980s. He'd check into rehab, Betty Ford Clinic, Cumberland Heights, Loma Linda Behavioral Medicine Center, and fight his way back to sobriety, over and over again. Because that's what recovery looks like. Not a single moment of triumph, but a lifetime of choosing to keep moving forward, even when the darkness calls you back. But October 1967 was the moment that made all the others possible. The moment when Johnny Cash chose to crawl toward the light instead of lying down in the dark. Nickajack Cave is flooded now. A dam was built in 1967, and the passages where Johnny Cash nearly died are underwater. No one can go in there anymore, but the story remains. Not as a fairy tale about instant redemption, not as a simple narrative about hitting bottom and bouncing back, but as a reminder that sometimes the darkest moment isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of the fight to survive. And sometimes, when you're lying in the dark, convinced there's no way out, God sends a breeze to follow. You just have to be willing to crawl. If this story moved you, leave a like. Share it with someone who needs to know that the darkest moment doesn't have to be the final one. And subscribe, because we tell the stories that matter, the ones that remind us why we keep fighting.